Are you prescribed antidepressant medication? If so, RFK Jr. thinks you're an addict and wants your provider to deprescribe these medications. Let's put him and his backward policy ideas on the couch. "32 million Americans take antidepressants, and if you're one of them, RFK Jr. thinks you're an addict. Instead of that medication, he proposes that you go to a wellness farm where you can grow organic vegetables and get reparented." Now, RFK Jr. himself is in recovery from opioid dependence, and he chose the abstinence model, and I suppose something like this organic farming model, instead of the gold standard of treatment, which is medication-assisted treatment. As a psychiatric nurse practitioner, I prescribe this medication in my practice, and I can tell you it works. We know what happens when ideology replaces evidence. People die. Welcome to the world on the couch, where we put the news cycle through a psychological lens, because that's the part that the news always misses. I'm Dr. Marlene Ryle. I'm a psychologist and a psychiatric nurse practitioner with 30 years of experience in the field. And you're watching The World on the Couch. This is not clinical diagnosis. This is analysis and commentary. And be sure to stay till the end. I've got a special surprise in store. This week, RFK Jr., the HHS secretary, initiated a federal deprescribing program for antidepressants. First off, we don't use that word, deprescribe, in the clinical community. When we talk about medications and changing them, we talk about dosage, frequency, we talk about initiating treatment, tapering someone up or down, titrating someone up or down, and when they stop a medication, it's called discontinuation. We do not use the word deprescribe. It isn't a thing. Now, RFK Jr. seems to think that one of the most common forms of antidepressant, especially that came out in his heyday, were SSRIs, things like Prozac, Paxil. Now, he thinks that they're more addictive than heroin and that they're the cause of school shootings, none of which have any evidence to back up his claims. Now he has the federal power to impose his ideology for people to, instead of taking antidepressants, to go to a wellness farm, to plant vegetables, and to be reparented. So let's talk about the research. In the Psychiatric Times, it was noted that most shooters are not on psychiatric meds. In fact, the Columbia Mass Murder Database documented that only 4% of mass shooters ever took antidepressants, whereas in the general population, that number is 13%. So they are underrepresented, not overrepresented. In the PNAS study, antidepressant use in children who experience mass shootings rose up to 20% after a school shooting, and these effects persisted for up to 5 years. So what we can draw from this is that shootings actually cause kids to need to be prescribed antidepressants, not the other way around. Kennedy has it backwards. Also, I think you may have seen that there's a black box warning on antidepressant medication that talks about the increased risk of suicidality in people under 18. In a subsequent study after that black box warning was put on, it showed that there were reduced physician visits for depression and increased deaths due to suicide. So once again, we've got the causation backwards. Now, before we move on to RFK Jr.'s psychology, I want to talk a bit about the language that he uses because it is crucial. And I also want to address a common misnomer about the category of medications known as antidepressants. Now, we don't just use those medications to treat people with depressive disorders. They're also considered first-line evidence-based treatments for anxiety disorders, like generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, people with obsessive compulsive disorder, and also people who have PTSD. So that's a pretty wide misnomer that just because you might be prescribed an antidepressant doesn't necessarily mean that you're depressed. And I would like to see us update those categorizations for those on some other drugs. But let's talk about Kennedy's use of language, because it's truly is archaic and frankly pisses me off. Kennedy calls people addicts. He does not use the person-first language that is now our clinical standard. Now we use things, and you'll hear me say it, people with substance use disorders, people with opioid dependencies, people struggling with PTSD. The word addict was deliberately retired, and it was deliberately retired for evidence-based reasons. Research shows that using that word increases stigma in the public and among clinicians. It's associated with more punitive, less compassionate care, and I've seen that firsthand over the years. It's not a clinical term. It's a moral verdict. And when the top health official uses that term and uses it about people who are being treated with antidepressants, that isn't a slip. That's a framework. We don't say that people with diabetes are addicted to insulin. We don't say that people with hypertension are addicted to their antihypertensive medications. This is a framework that is a moral condemnation dressed up as public health policy. And it makes me, frankly, quite sick. In episode 1 of The World on the Couch, we discussed defense mechanisms, and 2 defense mechanisms in particular, projection and reaction formation. Now, if you'd like a little more information about what a defense mechanism is and what reaction formation and projection do, please go back and watch episode 1, but please be kind, it was my first episode. Now, Kennedy genuinely had a dependency on opioids, heroin specifically, and he went through a very difficult and very real recovery process, and he still is in it after 40-something years. But now he's taking his subjective experience, and much of it, I'm sure, was not pleasant, and we don't really like to be consciously aware of our unpleasant memories a lot of the time. But he's relocating that subjective experience onto people who are taking prescribed psychiatric medications. He's seeing his own history and other people's medicine. That is projection. Now, he recovered through abstinence in a very bougie inpatient treatment center, and we're going to talk about that. That recovery has become his crusade. It's not just a testimonial. He is using his treatment and this idea of wellness farms and reparenting as a testament and a monument to his own recovery mythology. He is imposing federal power to take his path and only his path. That is reaction formation. His delivery is intense, he is completely rigid, and he holds no space for any other path, no matter how much evidence is behind it. Now, that is also a very specific cruelty, because medication-assisted treatment works for people for whom abstinence only does not, and these are not 2 equal philosophies. Medication-assisted treatment has quite a literature base to support it. And he's basically saying, I was saved by this path, and you can't use any other path because this is the one. And he believes he's making America healthy again. He believes in the goal of MAHA. But keep in mind, with reaction formation, the crusade is the defense. The wellness farm, the reparenting is the symptom. We have to talk about the elephant in the room here. When they talk about the elites, it doesn't get more elite than Robert F. Kennedy Jr. In 1983, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was arrested for heroin possession. And when he went to court, he was given the option of prison or community-based service and probation. Well, he chose community-based service and probation and went to one of the most premier psychiatric hospitals in the country, the Fair Oaks Hospital in Summit, New Jersey. Most Americans arrested for heroin possession at that time were not given that option. Robert Kennedy's name kept him out of prison. Robert Kennedy's name and wealth and generational wealth that he did nothing to contribute to afforded him the opportunity to get treated at the most prestigious facility in the entire country. Most Americans do not get that chance. Now, this also was 1983, over 40 years ago, when medication-assisted treatment was not available, when harm reduction was not even something you could say together in a sentence. So he got the abstinence-only treatment that was available at the time. But let's be clear. He is trying to model a modern day treatment facility based on old science, on something that only the wealthy get access to, while simultaneously cutting funding for research for substance use disorders and for mental health disorders, by cutting Medicaid and Medicare funding that will limit people's access to mental health and substance abuse treatment more than it already has been. So this is not just a policy disagreement. This is an elite class analysis with a body count attached to it. Now, there's already enough stigma around mental health and substance use disorders, and Kennedy's campaign is only going to drive that stigma even higher. This stigma keeps people from accessing substance use disorder treatment for mental health disorders. It stops people from calling a suicide hotline. It keeps people from talking to their primary care provider, which is where most people get their first antidepressant. So we have to know that he is making the situation worse and not better. And he's also cutting funding to the NIH, which is dismantling the evidence base that pushes directly back against his public policies. This is a psychology with a body count attached to it. Now, I'd also like you to name one insurance company that's going to pay for somebody to go to a wellness farm and watch vegetables grow. Because I've had enough trouble trying to get someone into a detox for more than 3 days or 4 days, or to try to get somebody into inpatient care for more than 14 days. It's a lot of work, and I doubt that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. ever called rehab center after rehab center to see if it took their insurance, or had to have their doctor write a prior authorization over and over and make appeals in order to get that paid for. He has no idea what he's talking about because he has no idea what the average American goes through. Now, I want to take a moment to speak directly to the people who may be watching who have substance use disorders or who have family members who have substance use disorders. You are not an addict. Your substance use disorder does not define you. The word is not clinical. It's a stigmatizing label that has no place in treatment. You are a person with a medical condition, and there are evidence-based treatments that exist that can help you. They work, and you deserve to have access to them and to have your insurance company pay for the full course of your treatment. Medication-assisted treatment works. I've seen it. I see people who are living full and complete lives while under that treatment modality. It's not the only path, though. I recognize that there is no one-size-fits-all treatment for everyone. And, there's therapy, community-based treatment centers, abstinence works for some, AA, going to your church and getting some spiritual supports. But my job, as a treatment provider, as a therapist, and as a nurse practitioner, is to work with you to find the path that can help you the best. And I'm willing to work with you through failures, because we often learn the most when we fail and we figure out what's next. So I'm not going to hand someone else's path to you like Robert F. Kennedy is trying to do and call it healthcare. You deserve better. And the science says you can have it. Now, if you stuck around to the end of this video, which we are rapidly approaching, I told you there was going to be something kind of surprising and special. And this is something that I wanted to do with episode 1, but I didn't get a chance, but I'm going to do it today. Not everybody can listen to me and hear this scientific mumbo jumbo and have it really penetrate. So I wanted to use a visual, and that comes from my experience as someone who's read tarot cards for over 40 years. So I picked a card that really encapsulates the discussion we've had today. And here it is. Now, this card is from the Aleister Crowley Thoth deck, and Lady Frida Harris did the wonderful illustrations here, and it's really evocative. And if you notice on the bottom, the title of this is Debauch. And debauchery is what we kind of associate with Dionysus, with overdoing it, with substance use disorders. And we can see that there are flowers here that are drooping over a fetid, stagnant pond. These cups that should nourish your emotions are filled with rot and goo. It's this promise of wellness that RF Kennedy Jr. has, but it's really a poison. It's a toxin that he's trying to inject into public policy. His Maha agenda, as you can see in this card, is built over a goopy, corrupt, unclear, muddy foundation. This is good intentions rotting in an unexamined personal psychology. Now, this doesn't mean that a person's lying, especially this card. This is sometimes we call building castles in the air. It sometimes can mean the inability to distinguish between what's real and what you need to believe. And that is exactly where we are. If you're considering stopping your psychiatric medication because of this federal initiative to deprescribe antidepressant medications, please listen. Please do not stop these medications abruptly. Before making any changes to your medications, please talk to your prescriber, and you guys can work together to create a plan that's going to minimize side effects and make the process go a lot more smoothly. Please don't stop alone without telling anyone. Help is there for you, and you deserve that help. Thank you for watching The World on the Couch. If you like what you've heard today, please like, please subscribe, please share. I hope you'll have discussions with friends and family members. And if you know any people who are struggling with mental health or substance use disorders, please send them to the show. Thanks so much for watching. The couch is always open.